Welcome to Helping of Happiness, episode number 101. Today we are talking with Tori Gilbert all about her travels around the world and what it's like living internationally in many different cultures. Hi, you're listening to Helping of Happiness. I'm your host, Hillary Hess, a crazy mom of 7 kids who loves to eat and loves to travel. Mom life can be exhausting, hectic, and scary at times, so let's take this journey together. We can love, we can learn, we can laugh, we can cry, and we can become better friends while we're at it. So with all the uncertainty that's been going on in the world, I just wanted to have a little podcast for you guys today. That would be a lot of fun. Tori has some really, really fun stories. Tori has lived in Taiwan. She's lived in China. She's lived in the U.S., in different parts of the U.S. She's also living currently in the Switzerland area, and she's just got some really fun stories that I'm so excited for you to hear. She's super down to earth and really, really fantastic. So go ahead and listen to her. We'll have a lot of links in the show notes about different things that we're talking about, such as our favorite foods that we discuss and the homemaking hacks. So make sure you grab those in there. So without any further ado, meet Tori. So Tori, tell us a little bit about your family, and then you've got so many amazing adventures around the world. I can't wait to hear about all of this. We met, I guess I should kind of throw this in here, when you lived in Texas, in between some of your adventures. And so now let's hear about where you've been and what you're doing and everything else.
It's been kind of a long process of moving around the globe. My husband and I have been married for about 10 years, and I think we've moved about 10 times in those 10 years. Long history of moving and being vagabonds a little bit. Homeless, I guess, sometimes.
So you have 3 kids and 1 on the way. So,
okay.
So where did you start with, like, when you started all this moving around the world, did you have kids when you were first moving around, or were you just newly married? When did this all start in your marriage?
Yeah, so I would actually say what sparked our international travels started before my husband, Chris, and I were even married. He served a mission for our church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he served a mission in Taiwan. So he was there for 2 years and learned Mandarin Chinese. And so once we got married, he enrolled in a program through his university called a flagship program, which basically allows you to live abroad and study your language abroad. So the first time we ever moved was just for 3 months, and we went to Taiwan. And it was super fun and interesting because we were back in the same areas where he had lived years previously. And so that was our first experience living abroad. We just did that for 3 months. Then we ended up finishing up some more schooling in Arizona and moved to Nanjing, China, which is about 3 hours from Shanghai. And we were there for 9 months. And after Nanjing, China, we went back to Arizona, then back to Taiwan for an internship, back to Arizona, and back to Shanghai, China. So it was like a lot of moving back and forth before we eventually landed in Texas, where I met you. Since Texas, we briefly lived in Singapore for 3 months, and now we are here in, where are we? I can't even keep track. Now we're in Switzerland. We're somewhere in the world. Right?
Somewhere that isn't in the Orient, somewhere different from that.
Yes, I know. And that was really exciting for us, was the opportunity to get to live in Europe, because we've spent a lot of time in Asia, which we loved. But we were definitely excited to try a different culture.
So, okay, do you mind if we kind of go through your countries and talk about the hardest things?
Let's break them
down.
Like
what you learned, what was most exciting, and then maybe what you love most about the culture, type of a thing. Okay, so do you want to start? Where do you want to start? Taiwan?
I'll start with Taiwan, because that was our first experience living abroad. So I was so excited to go to Taiwan. And when you're first living somewhere internationally, I think you kind of know and you get excited, and then you go to the grocery store and you can't find ingredients to cook with, and then it's the culture shock again. So maybe one of the more difficult things was just learning to adjust to the culture shock, because it was my first time living abroad. Aside from like a couple small trips to Mexico, I hadn't really left the US that much. And so you kind of go through this roller coaster of like being really excited about seeing something that's so foreign and interesting, and then all of a sudden feeling really discouraged and lost all the time and like completely unable to communicate with people. So I would say that was maybe like the most challenging thing initially. And it's surprising how much you miss your food.
Mm-hmm.
It's the foods that you're accustomed to. So I felt like I was hungry all the time in Taiwan. I was well fed, but I think I was a much pickier eater, and I was learning to try things that looked dry and gelatiny and foreign. And obviously after doing that for quite a few more years, I've just kind of become accustomed to strange textures and flavors and things that I wouldn't have eaten before. So I think that was just all part of the learning curve. In Taiwan and in China, everything is in Chinese characters. They use very little English. And so I was extremely dependent on my husband, Chris, because he speaks the language. So it was like he would have to read a menu for me. He would have to order for me. If I needed another napkin, he would need to ask for a napkin. I just felt like for 3 months in Taiwan, I was tapping him on the shoulder, like, what does this mean? Can you ask about this? Can you get me that? So it was kind of a baby. I was like completely incapable of doing things for myself. And this was pre-smartphone, so I didn't have the ability to just translate things and do things on my own that I do now. So technology like has made a really big difference and has made living abroad a lot easier since then, of course. Something that I just loved though about the culture, they have an extremely warm, family-centered culture, and they love babies. And so the first time we lived there, it was just me and my husband. We didn't have children. But the second time we were there, I was with my oldest daughter, and at the time she was about 6 months old, and people couldn't keep their hands off of her, which coming from America can be a little bit alarming if you don't understand the culture. But people will just walk up to you and they'll take your baby out of your arms and they'll hold her and they'll try and feed her. And understanding that aspect of the culture, I became okay with it. And it was something that I loved. Like, I loved being able to let my guard down and just realize, like, people here have good intentions. They love children. Like, they just want to help. And I remember one time we were eating in a restaurant that we frequented, and the waitresses knew us. They knew my daughter, Kinley, and they were holding her and playing with her so we could enjoy our dinner. And it had maybe been 10 or 15 minutes, and all of a sudden we realized, like, where's Kinley? Like, she's not in this restaurant anymore. And we looked out the window. They had this big glass window, and the waitress was just standing with her on the front doorstep, waving at people as they passed by, and totally good intention. But, you know, like, initially it kind of freaks you out, and then you remember, like, no, you're in one of the safest countries in the world where there's just this great level of trust and you can let your guard down. And I think sometimes this thinking in America is like, oh, this is so safe. I think sometimes people who haven't traveled outside of the country feel very fearful about what other countries might be like or what dangers might be there. But something I've learned living in China, living in Taiwan, living in Singapore, living in Switzerland, is I probably have felt safer in all of those countries at times than I have in the States. And I just say that to encourage people to travel if they're ever feeling, you know, like uncomfortable or reluctant about making that leap. because it's something that they haven't experienced before. I would say, like, generally people are very, very good, and a lot of these countries are extremely safe places to visit.
That's so cool. So cool. Taiwan and China, were they kind of both hard for the same reasons, or were different things harder about China, like in different hard than Taiwan?
Um, so China, we lived in China over the course of 2 years, and it was broken up. So we lived in China for 1 year, once again as just a couple with no kids. And then the second time we went back, we had kids. So it was a completely different dynamic. Like living abroad without kids, living abroad with kids is so drastically different. The first time we were there, I actually was pregnant with my first. And so once again, like, it sounds crazy to be so obsessive over the food, but that for me was the hardest
Oh,
thing. Was
especially
I felt
pregnant. Yeah.
hungry all the time, and I missed just kind of the comfort cooking and things like that. So that was probably the hardest thing for me the first time that we went. The second time that we went, it was just like city life with kids was a real challenge. I went there with a 3-year-old, and I think I was about 6 months pregnant, and I had my second in a Chinese hospital, which was a really interesting experience because they legally cannot tell you the gender of your baby. So I had to get all of that information before I left the States. But I had a really positive experience. I had my baby in an international hospital, which I think is why things went well. But it's just city living in general is very hard, whether you're doing it in Shanghai with 23 million people or whether you're doing it in New York City, with 8 million people. You don't have a vehicle. You're trying to tote around all these babies and carry your groceries and make sure no one runs away and no one gets lost.
Did you have anybody run away? Did you have any loose
I
ends?
did. I did have a couple loose children. So my daughter Kinley, she was a flight risk. She would always just take off, and she's a very spirited girl. So, I mean, I just remember thinking, if we get out of here without being run over, it'll be a miracle. And it really was a miracle we never got run over. But she darted into the street a couple times. And I remember once I was trying to get through a gate, and the gate had opened because she was small, or she snuck under it and ran through, and I didn't fit. I was like, 9 months pregnant at the time, trying to hop over this fence, and I'm yelling to the security guard, like, open this door, I need help, like, my daughter's run out. But you don't speak the language and you just feel totally helpless. So there were plenty of times that you just kind of had to deal with the frustration of not being able to communicate or get the help that you needed, and you just kind of do charades until you act out what you need, and then you carry on. So China, I would think, was probably the hardest of all of our experiences, but I think it was also the most rewarding. If you've lived in China, you really feel like you can live anywhere in the world because culturally it's so different. The language is so different. The food is so different. But I really felt like a strong sense of attachment to it. And it was actually really difficult for me to leave. But I also think leaving was a good timing for us because I was extremely stressed out all the time, just trying to keep track of little kids in a big city. So, yeah, it was a great opportunity. We loved it. And you learn when you're living abroad just to have an incredible amount of flexibility. I think I mentioned I was pregnant when we moved to China the second time, and all of our things were being shipped from America to China. So they were supposed to have arrived within a couple months of us arriving in Shanghai, but they got held up in customs for 6 months. So I was going through this, like 30-pound weight change of like putting on all this weight, having a baby with literally no supplies, nothing. We had the furniture which came with the house, which was like 2 beds, not even a crib. And there was like a little table. That's all we had. We didn't have pots, pans, like, and I didn't want to rebuy all of these things because I knew that they were in China. They were just stuck in customs. And so you just kind of have to learn to like roll over the punches because unexpected stuff always happens. So, you know, not knowing like when your things are going to arrive is problematic, but it's out of your control. You kind of have to learn to be like, hey, this is the situation. We're going to deal with it. I know that it was winter when we arrived and now it's summer. So we're just going to cut, you know, the sleeves and all of the legs off of your pants. So we just like made adjustments and made do. And also you just kind of have to learn to be easygoing in the sense that like, it's not America. You can't put your kids in a car and buckle them into car seats and drive them to the grocery store. Like I had a scooter and I put Kinley on the back of it in a little tiny toddler seat, and I wore my newborn infant in a baby carrier, and I drove my scooter around Shanghai like everybody else does. And that's not like safe at all, and I would never do it. But like it was so exhilarating and it was so fun, and like having my scooter was just like such a, I don't know, it was such a good outlet for me because it allowed me to see the city. But you just kind of have to adjust to the culture and trust that you're going to be okay. And that was one of my concerns. Like I always worried about my safety a little bit in terms of getting in a scooter accident or getting hit by a car. Not so much, you know, the things that maybe you worry about in America, like I don't know, a crazy person who might
like a mugging or some kind of crazy,
you know what I mean? Right. And so I remember before we moved to China, I asked my dad if he would say a prayer for us that we would be safe. And he promised that we would be. And so I think I just relied like very heavily on that assurance that like I'm doing the best I can. I don't have a car and I don't have seatbelts to buckle my kids into. The best I can do is to drive around this scooter with the baby strapped to the front of me and just have faith that everything's going to be okay. And it was. So we learned a lot of flexibility in China.
So after China, like everyday life, probably you came back. Was that when you came to, did you go straight from China to Texas?
We went straight from China to Powell, Wyoming, which is where I'm from. It's a super small town with like 5,000 people. We were trying to kind of get like our bearings after living in China and figure out where we were headed next. And so we were there for about 6 months, once again
That's
with our
gotta be like the biggest culture shock ever, going from being
Right.
surrounded by people to being out in the country.
Exactly, like having restaurants and there was like great nightlife and things to do to pretty much, you know, Pizza Hut and McDonald's were our only options for food and for entertainment. You know, we only knew really my parents because everybody else that I've grown up with has left Powell. So that was it was a really big culture shock, but you don't take things like clean air and blue skies for granted. I mean, those were things that you rarely saw in China because there was so much pollution. And just the peace and the quiet and being able to let the kids play outside. So I think it was really therapeutic for us. So we were there and then moved to Texas, where we were for 2 years. And my husband started a new job. And the job agreement was you live in Texas for 2 years and you'll go international again, which we kind of love. At this point, I don't know how we'll ever find where we want to permanently settle.
Yeah,
because we're
yeah.
so and so Texas was great for us. It was like just kind of enjoying suburban America, you know, like we had, I think, 2 Chick-fil-A's a mile from our house. We had 2 Targets a mile from our house. It was just like the typical American dream. And we really, really enjoyed it. But we also just missed the excitement of living abroad. And I think another part of living abroad is there's typically a lot of uncertainty surrounding where you'll be moving, how long you'll be staying for. You know, a lot of expatriates in our similar situation, you ask them, how long are you going to be here? How long will you be there? And they don't really have a firm answer. I feel like it's extremely up in the air. So we didn't find out where exactly we would be moving until like right before it was time for us to move. And we got word we'd be moving to Singapore for 3 months. And then after Singapore to Switzerland. Actually, more accurately, we are living in Liechtenstein, which is a super tiny country, kind of wedged between Switzerland and Austria. But it's a very Swiss country. We rely on Switzerland for our army and different things like that. So we can just consider it part of Switzerland.
So tell me about Singapore. So what were your loves and your struggles and all the things in Singapore?
Singapore was great. It felt a bit like a vacation.
Especially when you know you're just there for 3 months. It's kind of like you don't settle in like you're moving in, right?
Exactly. We lived in a serviced apartment, so it was like we still had housekeeping and all of these services that you would have in a hotel, like a wonderful continental breakfast every morning. But we still had an apartment and our own space, which was great. So I had very few responsibilities. My daughter wasn't enrolled in school. She was being quote unquote homeschooled for 3 months, which meant we were having lots of cultural experiences, not for actual schooling we did. And it was just like a really nice change of pace because I'm kind of a busybody. And even when I didn't have a lot of work to do in Texas, I would just create work for myself. And so it was just really great to kind of take that time, like reconnect with my kids. We honestly had very few friends when we were there. We weren't there long enough to make a lot of friendships. And so there weren't a lot of distractions. It was just kind of me and my family and exploring this place that's very manageable. Singapore is small, so you can see a lot of it. You can see almost all of it in a 3-month period. And if you don't know much about Singapore, it's very similar to Chinese culture, but it also had a very strong like British influence because it was a British colony for so long. So they speak English. It was like China, but 1,000 times easier.
Ugh.
And it's extremely clean and efficient and like very modern. So it was a really, really fun experience. I would say the challenge though was we were on vacation for 3 months, and I think to a lot of people that sounds great, but the reality of it is
sometimes a vacation is nice for 2 weeks and then it's nice to be home again. Yeah.
You need some structure in your life and different things like that. And so I would say really that was probably our biggest challenge, was just feeling unsettled during that time. And like we weren't really able to make a home because we knew it was going to be so temporary.
Yeah. Okay, so how has Switzerland been?
Switzerland is great. It's so beautiful. We are living in the country. So this is our first time living abroad and not living in a huge city. And so for the first time living abroad, we have a car. We're very American. We bought a minivan, which is like a very un-European thing to do.
So did you guys choose to live out in the country, or was that part of the job that's where they had you living, was out there?
Yeah, this is part of the job. So my husband works for a European power tool company called Hilti, and Hilti is headquartered in Liechtenstein. And Liechtenstein, I think it's the 6th smallest country in the world. They have a population of 30,000 people. So that's just kind of where the job was. And so there's a couple other small towns and villages around us, but it's great. It's like extremely outdoorsy. You see tractors driving by, you see people riding their horses, and like we're in the Alps. So of course it's incredibly like scenic and beautiful. And people here just have a really, really, really strong appreciation for the outdoors. And I think kind of the American mentality is like, oh, I love to be outside when it's nice. Right?
Right,
Like
right.
that's how I am.
Oh,
I
that's
think
how I
you know,
am. Oh, yeah. 60, 70 degrees, get me there. Otherwise, I
right.
don't know.
If I'm too hot, I'm grumpy. If I'm too cold, I'm grumpy. But here, the attitude is there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. So, you know, we moved here in winter, and I kind of felt like, oh, I need to just shut up in my house because it's cold outside.
Especially
But
going from
people are
Singapore, right?
proactive. Yeah,
Because
I
Singapore,
know. It was like
super different climate.
hot and humid, and we were like swimming every day. And then all of a sudden, we're in Switzerland and it's super cold. And so I think that's one of the biggest lessons that we'll learn from living here is just having a greater appreciation for the outdoors despite the weather. And people here just kind of have their thing. They're either like really into mountain biking, or they're really into horseback riding, or really into skiing. And it's like a very family centered culture. So people just, they have their thing and they do it as a family. And I think that's really cool.
That
We
is really
haven't figured
cool.
out we haven't figured out what our thing is yet. It's very slow bike rides with 3 kids in tow. And everyone's falling down and crashing into each other. We're not quite as put together as the Swiss.
Because your oldest is, how old's Kinley?
So Kinley is 6, and then I have a 3-year-old son, Grayson, a 1-year-old, and then we kind of
And
have
then
an unexpected souvenir from Singapore, which is due in 3 months. Yeah. So 2 of my kids will be born internationally, but
that is really cool, though.
it's a wild ride raising
So, have
kids
you been
in a foreign
having a fun
country.
time traveling since you've been in Liechtenstein? It's really close to so many other countries, right?
Yeah, it is so close to so many countries. Most of our traveling has been done just within Switzerland, and then they have a holiday here, Carnival. So my husband had a couple days off work, and we weren't really planning on going anywhere. And last minute, I thought, like, let's go to Venice. They celebrate Carnival, and they wear like the beautiful, extravagant masks, and they have the gowns, and it's just like a really cool time of year to go. So on a whim, we went to Venice, and that's like right when the corona outbreak happened in Italy. So we've kind of been like in and out of quarantine since our visit to Italy about a month ago. And so it's like really hampered a lot of our travels, but I definitely have a ton of places that I want to see once we get through
Once
all of this.
everything's cleared up.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so what's it been like living in Europe with the coronavirus, though? Has that been, we talked a little bit before we started recording about this a little bit, just about just kind of how the different ways that the US reacts versus Europe a little bit.
Right.
Do you mind just talking about that just a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Um, so I feel fairly connected to what's going on in the States just because we have family there and like through social networking. And you see like all the panic buying in the grocery stores and like people buying guns and like I think really reacting very like nervously to the coronavirus. And I would say the biggest difference just from my observation is like it's already pretty full-fledged here. Switzerland's very small. I think it's a third the size of Utah. And we have 4,000 corona cases. So there's a lot more sickness here than in the US, at least in such a concentrated area. But I would say people seem a little bit more calm. Like you don't really see the panic buying and things like that.
Well, and you were talking about how everything is really shut down there, like all at once. I mean, and I feel like the thing that's weird here is that some places are really shut down and some places really aren't. Like some parts of Northern California are sheltered at home. They're not going anywhere. They're not doing anything, or it's a misdemeanor crime. And then there's other places also in California where, they've canceled school, but that's kind of the extent of things, right?
Right. Yeah, so here the government has taken pretty serious measures. So we border Italy. And so I believe that like a lot of our borders are shut, which is extremely unusual. So that's part of, I would say, like one of the big things that impacts us is we typically just drive to Austria for groceries because it's so much more affordable there. So we've like lost access to affordable groceries, which is a bummer, but we still have our highly expensive Swiss groceries we can buy. As far as quarantine goes, Switzerland has said by law no businesses can be open unless they're an essential business. And so grocery stores, pharmacies, and banks are open, and everything else has been shut down. So of course, like they encourage the social distancing and people to stay home. We're out in the country, so I don't really like see how much people are respecting that, in busier places. But our lives have gotten like really, really quiet in the last couple of weeks. My husband works from home and my kids are home from school for the next month, possibly longer. But even though it's a scary time, I still feel like really at peace here because I think people just react. They're less reactive about things. And I think there's just like a calmer attitude towards everything.
Oh, well, crazy time for all of us. What a wild adventure. And maybe a little unnerving to be. I mean, it's nice to calm there, but a little unnerving to be out of the country when everything's kind of wild too, probably sometimes.
Yeah, no, you do. You miss, I think, sometimes the security of home and things like that. We've been trying to decide if we should go back stateside for a little while, but since airspace will probably be shut down, whatever we decide, like we'll be stuck one place or the other. And I think that's when you really have to dig deep and say, like, where is home? So right now is home my home where my family is and my kids are, and where we're like creating this new life for ourselves, even though we've only been here for a couple of months? Or is home like back in Wyoming with my parents where I grew up? And we've decided for now to stay here. But I think that's just part of like embracing where you live and not fighting it. That's part of living abroad, is you just kind of have to say like, this is where we are, we're going to love it, and we're going to consider this home. Because if you don't have that attitude, you'll always feel unsettled.
Yeah. I love that. I love that so much. Okay, so is there somewhere you guys are headed next after this, or where you would like to go? What do you think?
We have so many places. We really wanted to go to Holland over Easter, but that's not going to be a possibility. I wanted to see the tulips in bloom. So we have so many trips planned throughout Europe, a lot of places I want to see in southern Italy. And it's kind of funny because we can't stay away from Asia. I still want to go to Japan. It's like the one place in Asia that's very high on my list that we haven't gone that I'd like to go.
So do you have any timeline of how long you're going to be living in Europe? Or you have another place that kind of like Texas was 2 years. How long do you guys get to be in Switzerland?
So we were told we'd be here for 3 years. And then after that, like it's completely unknown, which is kind of the story of our lives. We never can plan very far out. So I don't know if we'll go abroad again or if we'll choose to return stateside. I think we'll just wait till it gets to that point and then see what feels right.
Love it. I love how flexible you are. That is so great. I love it. Okay, so are you ready for my 3 helpful and happy questions?
Let's do it.
Okay, so this ties the podcast in with the Helping of Happiness website a little bit, because we talk about food, travel, and homemaking hacks on there, as well as housing the podcast archives. So to start out, this might be a little hard because you're been so many different places with so many different foods, but you have a favorite food or a favorite meal?
My favorite meal, I would say, or my favorite food is my grandma's cinnamon roll recipe. And I don't even know if it's because it's my favorite thing to eat, but just because it's such a piece of home. Like I was very, very close with my grandma. I would help her make cinnamon rolls when I was growing up. And so it's just attached to very fond memories.
Yeah, very sentimental. I love cinnamon rolls too. That's my mom often had cinnamon rolls for us after school and things, so I think I have that same kind of nostalgia
That's a
wrapped in.
place in your heart, right?
Yes, yes. I don't know, and there's just something about those coming out hot in the oven that, oh,
Yeah.
it's just dreamy. Okay, what about your best trip you've ever gone on or your dream vacation? I guess you've kind of been talking about where you'd like to go, but
Yeah. I think my favorite trip that I've ever been on was Guilin, China, which is in the south of China, and it has the Karst Mountains, which are like those really extreme when you think of traditional Chinese mountains that are covered in trees and they're like very spiky. Um, I don't know, it was just like such a dreamy foreign place to me. Even though we were living in China, we had been in cities. And so traveling there and like taking a bamboo raft down the river and biking through the countryside was just the coolest thing. And this was pre-kids. So maybe that it was part of the appeal. But I
that
loved
would be
that
so
area of China.
exotic though, just so different from anything that you've ever done.
Right.
That's so
So,
cool.
so exciting. I loved it.
Okay, what about a homemaking hack? You got a homemaking hack for us?
I thought of a couple, and actually, they're all homemaking hacks that I've learned from living abroad.
Cool.
So, dairy is very sparse in Asia. If you think about Chinese cooking, they
Hmm.
don't have hardly any dairy. Thankfully, we're in Switzerland where it's like there's dairy everywhere and
There's
it's all
milk
really
cows everywhere.
it's wonderful. So, um, buttermilk was almost impossible to find. And I learned to make my own, which maybe you've already talked about, but it's really simple. We just learned to mix like a tablespoon or so of vinegar or lemon juice into a cup of milk, and you just let it sit on the counter for like 10 minutes and it kind of curdles and makes buttermilk. And so if you ever want to make pancakes on a whim and you don't have buttermilk and you don't feel like running to the store, I always love to use that now because it's just so much simpler.
I actually use that a lot because I never think of buying buttermilk. Like I just
Yeah.
never,
Who
it's
buys
never,
buttermilk?
yeah, I've never done it with vinegar though. I've always done it with lemon juice. So I'll have to do that with vinegar when I'm out of lemon juice. What a good
Yeah.
idea.
And then the other one that I learned, so everywhere we've lived in Asia has been an extremely humid climate and really hot. And our towels and our laundry would always smell mildewy. And even in
Yes.
Texas, like we had
Yes.
mildewy
And
towels just
say
because
I
kids leave them on the
fight that
floor,
this
right?
time of year. Oh my goodness. Yes.
It's the worst. And so I would just throw in like a couple heaping scoops of baking soda in with my laundry, and it like really helps to freshen up your towels so they don't smell so bad.
Okay, I am doing that because it's right now with the rain. It's been raining constantly for like 2 weeks, and it's like even the sidewalks are getting mossy. We're like nothing is
Yeah,
drying out. It's crazy.
you can be
Oh,
pretty generous with it too. You can really pour a bit in there, and I think it's great for the laundry.
okay, I'm doing that. That's such a good tip. Oh, this has been so great, Tori. I love hearing about your adventures and just your love for trying new things. I think it's such a cool thing about you.
Well, thank you for taking an interest. It's always fun to talk about.
Well, and I also have to put a plug in. So right now on my website, I've got the my chicken pot pie recipe, which I
Mhm.
need to credit you for teaching me about crust because I was so bad at making pie crust. So that was something that I think I'll always think of you when I make chicken pot pie from now on because you
Thank
were
you.
willing to take me under your wing and teach me how to make a good pie crust. So you've got so many things. And then you have a handle on Instagram too, I forgot to mention too, where you have some really cute cookies and things like that.
Oh, I do. So my Instagram handle is better_with_butter. And that's where I do some of my baking and different things like that. Just fun things to kind of celebrate birthdays and just kind of self-taught baking.
No, and it's awesome. Everything on there is amazing. So yeah, go check that out. It's really cool. Okay, thank you so much, Tori.
Thank you, Hillary. It was super fun to talk to you.
If you're a travel junkie like I am, and you're interested in knowing more about some different places to travel, especially domestically, make sure you check out our website, helpingwithhappiness.com, and look at the traveling section that we have. We've talked about a lot of different places, mostly in the continental US, about lots of different tips on what to do with your family when you're traveling, especially when you have a bunch of kids like we do. And if you enjoyed this, share this with a friend, and we'd love it so much if you would give us a rating and a review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. Have a wonderful day.